don't have to just invest in your own market if it's not a market that fits your investing profile. When I went into other markets to look for property to buy, I had a hard time finding a realtor who understood investing.
Out of Town Landlord.com. You're listening to Copeland Morgan Media, your source for investment property analysis, education, and advice. Find us online at copelandmorgan.com. Hey folks, welcome back to the Tampa Bay Real Estate Investors podcast by Copeland Morgan Media. I'm your host, Jeff Copeland, and our guest today is Joe Facenda. Joe is a real estate investor, a real estate agent, and he's the founder of a group or a website, a platform called Out of Town Landlord that I think a lot of you folks will find very interesting. Before we dive into Joe, I just want to remind everyone that today's episode is brought to us by Semi-Retired MD and Semi-Retired Professionals. They are a real estate investing training and tax strategy platform to help physicians and other high wage earners achieve financial freedom through investing and through tax benefits, some of which we'll probably touch on today. But you can learn more about them at semiretiredmd.com. Joe, welcome. It's been, I think it was BC before COVID, the last time we saw each other when you were down here in Florida. How have you been?
Been very well. Yeah, I was in Tampa for a weekend for an investing seminar, and we had lunch that day, and it was nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Live and in person. Yeah.
So for those of you listening, Joe is a realtor in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. He's been in the business since 1989. He does all of your traditional realtor type stuff, but two areas he specializes in is inherited real estate, helping people essentially dispose of assets that they inherited, and of course, real estate investing. And so, Joe, I can imagine, I lived there for a few months one time, but the DC real estate market is tough.
It's a very tough market. It's a very competitive market. Like many markets right now around the country, inventory is way down. The county that I live in is called Fairfax County, just outside of DC. And we have maybe in the entire county right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 to 800 homes for sale. And this time of year, it should be 2,500 to 3,000. So it's pretty wild. And prices are rising like everywhere else in the country.
Yeah, and that's the case, I think, like you said, throughout most of the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
But even historically, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when you started out real estate investing in the DC metro area, it was still a tough real estate market back then. And,
right.
And so how did you, navigate that in terms of finding properties that cash flow? And as I understand it kind of forced you to kind of start looking in other markets as well to kind of keep all of your eggs out of a single basket.
Correct. Well, so like you said, I started as a realtor in 1989, and I always knew that I wanted to invest. But when you start out as a real estate agent, sometimes you're not making the kind of money you thought. Everybody thinks you make a lot of money. I started in July of 1989, and in 1990, when I got my 1099, it said $72. I did a rental. That was it. So, like, I wasn't like,
Well, you got to adjust that for inflation. So
yeah, okay, it would have been 150 today. But it took a while to get started. But I observed two of my clients. One bought townhomes right around their home, and just kept on buying and buying, and now decades, they never sold it, but a decade later, they've created such wealth. And so they were an inspiration for me. But then I had a client who worked for the World Bank, and he would travel around the world, and he might stop in New Zealand and buy a property in New Zealand. And then he bought an investment property with me locally, and then he sold it a couple of years later. And he did a 1031 exchange, and he bought a property in Raleigh. He bought a property in Dallas, and he bought a property in Florida, but I can't remember which city it was. But so it opened my eyes to the fact that you don't have to just invest in your own market if it's not a market that fits your investing profile. And our market has always been very expensive. I tell folks we have one of the best markets in the country for appreciation, but not so good for cash flow. There's so many other markets around the country that are better for cash flow. So first property I ever bought was actually out of the area. It was in Greensboro, North Carolina. And the reason I bought it is we had friends there, and we visited there every year. We went there every year for New Year's, 4th of July or something. And I started to look at the real estate prices it was in 2005. And I said, the price is $145,000 for this house. And it'll rent for, at the time, it rented for about $1,000 a month. And I thought, I can make this work. So that was my first venture. And, then I had to find a property manager and all of that. And it grew from there. And now, currently I do have, personally, I have 11 properties, only one in the DC area. And that was bought in 2008 when prices were so low that, you just couldn't you pick up property anywhere and make it
Back in the good old days.
Sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was like the 1.5% rule at that time, not the 1% rule, but the 1.5% rule. So, what happened is I started to pick up some properties elsewhere, and I always liked traveling. And I thought, I thought, one day it was just one of these brainstorm things that said, when I went into other markets to look for property to buy, I had a hard time finding a realtor who understood investing, and not your traditional realtor who, you want a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath colonial or so, whatever it is in your market. And then they send you a list of properties and I don't even know what they rent for or whatever. So, I said, there's no place out there that really where I can go and I can find a realtor who understands investing. And it just said, why? I mean, there's all these dating sites out there, there's all these match sites out there. Just let's match investors and investor-oriented realtors together. And so I came up with Out of Town Landlord, and require every agent that I've selected on the site to have been licensed at least 3 years, so they are experienced as a realtor at least. And everybody has to have either rented a property, personally rented a property, or personally done a flip. So they've been in some way involved with the investing community.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I struggled with that even here locally. And I think so many investor agents get their real estate license because they can't find an investor focused realtor who truly understands their needs, myself included. And, and so I love what you've done is you've created this platform to connect out of town real estate investors with investor focused real estate agents in their in the market, wherever it may be that they're looking to invest in. So, you mentioned those criteria: 3 years, done a couple deals. I mean, how did you arrive at those? And I guess my question really is, why are those your screening criteria, and how do they shake out? How do they work? Have they worked out, I guess?
Yeah. So in trying to find agents for the site in various cities, we're in about 70 different markets around the country. And also observing having been a realtor for so long, you see that a lot of people get their real estate license, and after a year they're gone, 2 years they're gone, or they've never really done a deal. So I really wanted somebody who not only knew how to find an investment property, but someone who knew how to get it to the settlement table and do it in a professional way and a stress-free way for this investor who's not even in the area. So I wanted some level of experience, and I think, if you've been a realtor for at least 3 years, you're probably going to be a realtor for longer than that. And the average on our site is about 11 years anyway. And then I just felt like, even though there are realtors who have successfully and done a great job helping investor clients and never personally invested, I felt like you just sort of need to put your own money in the game at risk. And you need to, be wondering when you're doing that, when you're signing that contract even though you're a realtor but you're buying a property to flip, or you're buying a property to rent, you have those you have those feelings about, is this a good decision? Did I do the right thing? Did I negotiate the right price? Are the repairs going to be more expensive than I thought? All these different things. And I think you could empathize with the clients if you've actually done it yourself. I'll give you an example is, I've been a realtor again since 1989, over 30 years. When I buy a property out of the area, I'm not there, but I get a home inspection done, and I get the home inspection report back. And we as realtors, when we're at the home inspection, we you're going to get a report back with 20 items on it. Every home inspection has 20 items on it. Most of them are nothing, and you're there and you're walking with the inspector and you see that thing he's going to put on the report, but it doesn't really mean anything. But when you're out of town and you get the report back and you look at these 20 items, you think this house is going to fall down tomorrow, and even though I'm and I can look at it and I should know that, so it's those feelings that you can, when you have experienced it, you're going to be able to help other people work their way through it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, I can think of a number of occasions where, I was representing the buyer, but told them, hey, if you don't buy this, I will, because I know it's a good deal and you should buy it. And that's why we've negotiated, this or found this property or whatever. And so, I think, being in that situation, having worn the real estate investor shoes, definitely makes a huge difference. And we did an episode of a few episodes back about the home inspection process. And that's a great point, that being there with the inspector and getting that sort of verbal pass down gives you so much more info in terms of what's crucial and what's just noted in the report. And and I know as investor focused realtors here on our team, we often, even if the buyer's out of state, will attend that inspection and sort of be those boots on the ground for them and help them interpret that report, because it's very intimidating when you get a 30-page home inspection report and you're trying to digest, is the house falling down, or is this just a very observant and detail oriented inspector, and helping to kind of figure that out is crucial.
Right. And I'm sure in all of your home inspections that you've done as a realtor, for your personally or for your clients, you've never gotten a report with nothing on it, right?
Never had a clean home. Even with new construction, it's still 10 pages long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, it can be scary, and to be able to have done it yourself, you can empathize and give better advice and keep people in, like you said, keep people in a deal they should be in, and also be able to advise them on a deal they should get out.
Yeah, that is equally important. The bullets you dodge are sometimes the best ones. Yeah. But on the flip side, there have been times where it's like, you should buy this. It's such a great deal. And people get an analysis paralysis or whatever. And just, helping people navigate. It's tricky sometimes. And shouldn't I? Do we move forward with this property? Do we walk away? Do we renegotiate? Having an experienced investor agent, I think, makes all the difference in the world. So that's why I really love your platform and love what you're doing there. And people can find it at outoftownlandlord.com, correct?
Correct.
And so what's go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing about why I wanted an investor-oriented realtor is because if you're doing traditional residential real estate, you're meeting a client, and our business is based on referrals and all that. That's great. But they're going to buy a home, and you might not have another transaction with them for 7 or 11 years, right? Because the average time somebody stays in the house used to be about 7. I think now it's up to 11 years. That's one of the reasons the inventory is a little bit lower, because people are staying longer. But if you do a great job, if your mindset as an investor-oriented realtor is, this is like the potato chip. You can't have just one. I mean, an investor's not going to buy just one property. They're going to be back again as soon as they get another down payment together or another situation arises. So you want to be able to advise appropriately the client who's out of town, or even if they're local, because you don't want them to, after the sale, find out that was the deal they should have gotten out of. Or conversely, when you tell them to stay in the deal and they're really happy, they're going to be back to you again. So it's a win-win situation, because Investors typically don't buy just one.
Absolutely. And that's such a crucial point that you just made is that's where we add value as real estate agents or real estate brokers is helping people buy the deals they should, but weed out and walk away from the deals that they should not. And if you can get good at that as a real estate agent, you can build a career working with investors, and they will never even bat an eye or question your commission, because you are saving them much more than your commission in bad deals they walked away from, better negotiated price points, interpreting those inspection results and figuring out, what should we not do. And I've built a career on just what you said, repeat clients. I have one client who's went from 1 to 100 doors here in Tampa Bay, and I helped him buy and manage every single one. But when you build up that kind of relationship, you're not out there having to pound the pavement for new business. You've got repeat business. And like you said, it's very different from traditional real estate agents where it's one and done, the large percentage of the time.
Yeah. So, if you're doing a flip, you need somebody who really understands what the after repair value is. If you're buying buy and hold a rental, I want that agent to be able to tell me within, $50, $25, what's the rent for that, property. And when I work with an investor client, that's the scariest thing, because if I tell them the rent is $2,000 a month and they only get $1,700 a month, my relationship is done. But if I tell them 2 and they get 2 or 2,100, they're going to be back again. So, it's giving advice, adding value to build that repeat business. Absolutely. And that's why I wanted people who in the site who were investor oriented.
So as an out of state or out of town investor, if someone is listening to this episode and they're sitting in, New York or Chicago or Minnesota or whatever, and they're looking at investing in other markets around the country, what's the process? How do they get started at outoftownlandlord.com? And then what happens? Are they going to have 80 agents contacting them because they put in their email? Or, you're obviously screening these people and there's a limited number. So how does it work?
For each city, most cities only have one agent that I've selected. Some cities, because of the way the timing worked when I was trying to find people that might have 2, maximum would be 3. So you go to the site, you click on the state in which you're interested in investing, and click on the city, and you'll see the profile of the agent, and then you fill out a form, and then they will contact you. So it's a direct link to that agent, and the site doesn't talk about. I don't sell anything on the site. Don't have any ads on the site. So it's really just a way for you to link to that agent. They have their bio, a little bit about their market. But I'm assuming that if you're contacting somebody in Kansas City, that you've already decided Kansas City is the market that'll work for you. And so it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I was just sitting here thinking about how opposite your model is from Zillow, for example. On Zillow, you see a house you're interested in, and you accidentally click that button, and all of a sudden 7 agents are pouncing on you. Yours is just the opposite. You go to the city you're interested in, you read about the agent and their experience and their market, and you decide, hey, I want to contact that person and ask them some questions about their market. And so it's very direct and a direct connection, which is what I really like about it. So in addition to running this platform, outoftownlandlord.com, we talked about the fact that you are an active real estate investor yourself. You have 11 properties. One of the things I noted, and I'm always interested in different, tax strategies and things like that, is that you own almost all of your properties in self-directed retirement accounts. So how did you land on that strategy and become sort of an expert in that strategy? And what does it do for you from a tax perspective?
Right. So the first 2 properties I bought were using my own personal money, not retirement money. That was the property in Greensboro and the property in my local market in a place called Manassas, Virginia. And then that was like 05 and 08 or something like that. And then I took a little pause from investing because I have two boys who were going to college for 8 years, private college tuition. Wasn't really any room there for real estate investing. But I still kept my finger on the investing market, was helping investor clients, and started to attend a lot of real estate meetups. And at one of the real estate meetups, I heard about using your retirement funds to buy real estate. And I thought, this is fantastic, because we all have really two pots of money. If you have your own money and you have your retirement money. Now, some people can choose whether they want to buy a property. They can have a choice. Do I buy a property with my regular money, or do I buy a property with my retirement money? I didn't really have a choice, because I always had more money in the retirement account and not as much in the personal account.
It's a good problem to have.
Right. So when I heard about, I always wanted to fund my retirement accounts and all that. So when I heard that you could buy real estate with your retirement money, I thought, well, I know real estate. This is something that I know, and that's really what self-direction is all about. So I studied and learned about it, and decided that this was the way to go. The other one of the reasons I like it is, first of all, when you sell a property in your IRA, which I'm about to do this year, and I did last year as well. I sold a property in Charlotte because the prices had gone sky high, like most markets, but the rents had not sort of risen at the same rate, and it was getting out of whack. And I thought there was better use for that equity in another market, so I sold that property in Charlotte, and I bought in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Now, let me just interject here real quick, because the normal concern when you do that is like, well, great, I'm going to have $150,000 gain or whatever. Right. I'm going to have to pay taxes on that money. Now, here comes the kicker with doing it through your retirement account. Right.
No tax, because think if you bought shares of General Electric and they went up in your retirement account, and you sold that stock, Microsoft, whatever, you don't pay any tax on it because it's in a retirement account. Same thing with a house. So when it goes up and you have a huge capital gain, it doesn't matter. Now, in outside of a retirement account, you would need to do a 1031 exchange, which probably most of your listeners are familiar with. And that's a very scary proposition in today's market, because while you can easily sell your home, you only have 45 days to identify the replacement home. And in a 1031 exchange, and the market is so hot that you might not be able to lock anything down in 45 days. So it's a little bit scary. So when you sell in a retirement account, not only do you not have any capital gains, you have no time pressure, and you don't have to reinvest the money in real estate. When you're in a self-directed account, you could say, if you got that $150,000, you could say, I'm going to buy another property. You could say, I want to start to loan money to fix and flippers. I want to become a lender. I want to buy livestock and invest in livestock. You can do whatever you want to do in a self-directed account, whereas in 1031 exchange has to be real estate for real estate. Self-directed, you can do anything you want to do. And I also, early on in my real estate career, I had a next door neighbor, and Mr. Engen. And Mr. Engen rented the house next door to me. He was in his 80s or 85 years old, and he was a very wealthy man, but he continued to rent the house. And every year when he came by to re-rent the house, I'd say, Mr. Engen, you want to sell the house? I didn't say it sort of like this, but I said, you're 85 years old. Why are you renting this house? Let me sell it for you. So he said, no, I'm not going to sell. I don't want to pay those capital gains. I'm going to wait till I die, and my children will get it at a stepped up basis. And I hate being a landlord, but I can't stomach paying those capital gains. And eventually his wife got sick, and he said, no, I can't do this anymore. So what he actually did is he gave it to his church, and then I sold it. I ended up being the realtor to sell it for the church. But the point is that at some point, we don't want to own real estate anymore. And so if you own it outside an IRA, at some point, you're going to pay those capital gains. And if you've held it for 30 or 40 years, or you 1031 into multiple properties, and your basis is really low and your gain is really high, I mean, you can have a big tax bill. In an IRA, you don't have that. You can get out anytime you want. You get tired of being a landlord when you're 70, 80, just sell it and invest in stocks, or keep the money, do bonds, whatever you want to do. So exit strategy is easy, no taxes, all good.
Yeah. So just for people who are trying to wrap their head around this at home, you obviously have to build up a cash balance in your IRA before you can have enough money to use to buy a property. And there are annual contribution limits. And so I think my point is, if you don't have an IRA and you're 50 years old, it's tougher to start later.
Correct.
But if you're 25 and you just started your career, maximize those IRA contributions, because as you build up a cash balance, I mean, even if you're investing in other stuff, as your balance grows, later on, you'll have the option of taking that money and investing in real estate. And then you can buy and sell real estate tax free, which is a huge, I mean, long-term capital gains for most people are 15%. So you're adding 15% every time you have a real estate transaction. And that adds up over the years, it sort of multiplies.
Right. And again, when you sell the property, when you're older or whatever, when it's time to withdraw money from your IRA, if you when you withdraw money from an IRA, you pay regular income tax on it. But when you sell a property and you make $200,000 or $250,000 capital gains, all of that $250,000 is taxed. You sell the property IRA, you just let the money sit there, and then maybe you want to buy a new car and you take out $30,000 or whatever. You'll be taxed on that. You're not taxed on everything, all the proceeds. And you mentioned that you need to build up a nest egg in your IRA, but the other thing, you can also borrow in your self-directed. And I've got loans on many properties. They're called non-recourse loans, which means that the only recourse that the lender has is to take the property. If you were to not pay the mortgage, the lender cannot come after your other properties, even if they're in the IRA. The lender cannot come after you personally. The only recourse they have is to take the property. Therefore, the down payment, because the lender has more risk, the down payment is higher. So you're typically going to have to put down 40%, and the interest rate is higher as well. It's probably going to be 1.5 to 2 points higher than it would be if you were doing it outside your IRA. But the lender won't lend to you unless the property cash flows. It has to be the rent needs to be at least 25% more than the mortgage for most of these lenders. So it has to, even though you have a higher interest rate, it has to cash flow, or the lender won't lend against the property. And the other thing that's really great about borrowing against property in a self-directed IRA is that the property, non-recourse loan, so the property is the collateral. They don't need to know anything about you personally. I have borrowed against my IRA. They don't ask me if I'm working, how much I make. They don't ask for 3 months of bank statements, 2 years of tax returns, all this stuff. All they want to know is, do you have money in your retirement account to put down and to have some reserves? And does the property cash flow? If the answer to those two questions is yes, you'll get your loan. One company ran credit on me just to make sure I'm not a deadbeat. The other company I've used, they didn't even run credit. So you could basically be unemployed and buying real estate in an IRA, and it's not on your credit report. So it's not like you have extra debt on your credit report, because
Joe Facenda is not borrowing the money. The IRA is borrowing the money.
The IRA is borrowing the money.
And that's a great strategy to be aware of, because if you have $100,000 in your IRA, $100,000 won't buy you much these days. But if you can put 40% down, it allows you to leverage your retirement money And then if the property appreciates, like especially like we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, then at some point you have the option of selling it and putting all that cash back in your IRA, and you don't pay tax on the money until you choose to withdraw a little bit of the money. And you can do that strategically once you're in retirement and in a lower tax bracket. And like you said, you don't get taxed on the whole gain. You get taxed on the $30K that you pulled out for a car or for living expenses or whatever.
Right. For the vacation and all that. So for your listeners, though, who may not have heard of this concept before, let me just tell you the restrictions on it so you know that it doesn't work for all types of property. The big restriction is that you can't personally use the property. So if you're, outside of an IRA, you buy a vacation property, you can use it 2 weeks a year without any kind of tax. You can't spend one night in this property of yours, or technically you have violated the term. And if the IRS knew that, they could blow up your IRA and consider it to be liquidated, But so you can't use it personally, and you can't do business with your spouse, your parents, or your children. So some people like to buy property near a college campus where their child is attending, and then they rent it, save money on the dorm and campus housing and all that. You can't rent it to your child. You can't buy a property for your parents and have them move in. So it has to be hands off. And if you're doing a fix and flip, which is allowed in self-direction, you can't do any of the work yourself. Everything has to be hired out. You can't, theoretically and technically, you can't even change a light bulb. I mean, everything has to be, you can't do anything in the IRA.
Yeah, the arm's length transaction, I think, is the term that the IRS uses. But that's a great point, because a lot of those strategies you just mentioned are certainly viable and attractive in many cases,
right? But
those wouldn't work for a self-directed IRA.
Right, and all the money, all the rents or the profit from the flip have to go to a third-party custodian who handles, and all the expenses need to come out of that. You can't touch any of the money. So, there are certain strategies when you're investing and using an IRA, which you might need to talk to your custodian about. I know people who like to do, I don't know much about these, but, tax deeds, tax liens, and, buying these things where you might need money very quickly. Sometimes that's a little harder in a self-directed IRA. So, I think it's great, and it's how I've been buying properties and plan to continue to buy properties. I see no reason to buy anything outside of the IRA.
Well, assuming you're going to keep it for the long term into your retirement years. Absolutely. Right. That makes great sense. And we did an episode a while back. You can look it up in our archives on self-directed IRAs and also self-directed 401ks for people who own businesses. So if you have an LLC for your rentals, or you have an LLC for your real estate, sales or property management, or any type of LLC, really, there's the option of setting up a 401k, which is a company funded retirement account. And you can also self-direct those. So there are a lot of interesting options out there that ultimately help you scale up your investing more, because you're paying so much less in taxes. You don't have Uncle Sam skimming 15% every time you make a deal. And that, like I said, it multiplies over the years.
Right. And technically, I've been using the generic term self-directed IRA, but technically everything that I do is in a 401k, because as a realtor, as you well know, you're self-employed. So you're able to I'm able to set up a solo 401k, which also allows for contributions, which does accelerate.
Right. And it increases the contribution limits every year considerably. Yeah. Right. Well, it's a great model. And if people want to learn more about it, or talk to you about it, or talk through it, or ask about your custodian or whatever, what's the best way to get in touch with you or find you? So
the best way is through my website or an email. My website is joefacenda.com, and the email is joe@joefacenda.com. So just reach out, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about self-direction. I also do co-host a meetup with monthly meetup with my owner of the company that I use as a custodian, Mid-Atlantic IRA out of Frederick, Maryland. We do that once a month, and but always happy to talk self-direction. Always happy to talk investing, because to me it's a way to generate wealth, but it's also for me. I'm doing it in retirement because for me I'm looking for cash flow, and I expect my properties to provide the income I need in retirement.
Awesome. And so just as a recap, you are an active investor and an active real estate agent. I can see the Remax
Correct.
banner behind you in the DC metro area, Northern Virginia.
Correct.
So if anybody's listening, has property in that area, needs to buy or sell property in that area, Joe's a great person to know, as you can probably tell. If you're looking to invest in other markets, then where you want to go is Out of Town Landlord. The platform we talked about earlier, and you can find Joe at joefacenda.com. So Joe, we do have a couple of closing questions that we like to ask everybody. The first one is, where do you see the real estate market going in the next 2 to 5 years? And I know you're DC based, but I think the trends, there's going to be some regional differences, but I think we're going to see some national trends as well.
I don't see a reason. I don't know why we would suddenly have more inventory. The inventory shortages, I think, are still going to be happening, particularly in our area. I don't know the numbers per se, but we have a severe housing shortage right now. Our market, the market I work in, is the market that Amazon moved has their second headquarters. Yesterday, it was just announced that Boeing is moving from Chicago to Arlington, Virginia, the same market. We have a tremendous influx of jobs and a shortage of housing. So I see a steady rise, but I don't know. And I also know that in our market specifically, I have average housing prices from 1975 on. It's on my website, joefacenda.com. And if you look at, and I have rolling 10-year averages, 5-year averages, year-to-year changes. There have only been like 5 year-over-year times when prices have dropped in our market, and 2, I think, were in the 08, 09 period. There's never been a 10-year period where prices have dropped. Our market continues to remain strong. I do think that in other markets around the country, I get a little bit of a feel through Out of Town Landlord is what's happening in other markets. Nationwide, we continue to have an inventory shortage. I am starting to see in the short term maybe a little bit of a break on the market. I put a home on the market last week that would have a month ago gotten 12 contracts, only got 2. I'm not complaining. I got 2. It's good. It's
still multiple offers, but that's a big difference. And that's such a ton of work, even for the listing agent. When you have 50 people who want to submit an offer, trying to sift through all that is actually much harder than if you've got 1 or 2 that you can negotiate. So I
see a little bit of a slowdown, but I see prices continuing to rise, rents continuing to rise over the long term.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective that I would agree with, at least from a Tampa Bay, Florida market perspective, because we have just continued population growth and continued housing shortage. It's a supply and demand problem. And the problem is you can't fix the supply side quickly. You can't build housing faster than the population is growing. So it'll be interesting to see with inflation and interest rates and things, those are going to impact the market in a downward way, in the sense that those factors tend to cool off housing prices, but there's so many other factors that are pushing them up that it's an interesting time to watch the market. Right.
Those impact the demand side, which then maybe more homes linger on the market, so inventory can go up a little bit. But you hear people talk about, well, maybe we'll change the zoning, maybe we'll allow affordable units in a backyard or something like this. These are longer term solutions, and it takes a long time from the idea to somebody moving into a building. So in the short term, I don't see any real way that we're going to increase inventory, and therefore it's going, should continue to rise and be difficult because there is a huge demand for housing.
Yep, that has been pretty much my steady take on it. But
Mm-hmm.
some people do project that prices will come down somewhat. But I think it's like you said, it's a slight cooling, not a real slowdown, and anytime soon anyway. The other question that I like to ask everybody is what's a tip, a trick, or words of wisdom that you wish you had known starting out? What would you tell somebody who's just starting out in a career, they want to start investing in real estate? What would have put you further down the road had you known it back then?
Well, first of all, get started, and you can only study so much, right? I think I started too late. I'm in a pretty good position now, but I started way too late. I could have done it a little bit earlier, but you wait too long. But I'll tell you the one thing that really, as I observe other working as a realtor with other investors that I observe, is don't sit around looking for that perfect deal, because there's always going to be, if you buy property A and you say, I'm only going to buy it if it's perfect, you're going to buy, and then you're going to see property B and you're going to be upset. Be happy with a very good deal. Be happy with a deal that meets most of your criteria, that cash flows decently, maybe not optimally, because if you keep on waiting for that perfect deal, you'll never buy anything.
Yeah,
a lot of very good deals.
That is a great point. I think I mentioned earlier that I have a client here who went from one door, and I think 2014, 15, something like that. He now has like 130 doors or something like that. And we did a profile on him on our blog. You can find that at copelandmorgan.com/blog. But one of the questions, or one of the observations we talked about, is these aren't all home run deals. There's no way you can go from 1 to 150 doors if you're hitting home runs every time. It's just not going to happen. But his strategy was, no, these are solid base hits. These are good, solid properties, some better than others, but they're all in that range of good enough. And he's been very successful in building up his portfolio. And those are all, directly owned. They're not like syndications or whatever. But yeah, I think the strategy is to get some base hits, get some properties under your belt, and every once in a while a home run will fall into your lap, but it's a rare occurrence.
Well, Jeff, I love baseball. I still play baseball, and the way I hit is the way I invest. I'm a singles hitter. I have one of the highest on base percentages on, we don't keep stats, we're playing for fun and all that. But if I did, I know I would have one of the highest on base percentages on the entire team. But I'm, there's other guys with for power, but I just am happy to get the singles and be on base and score runs and knock in runs and all of that. And have a high batting average, and might not have I don't have the highest number total bases, but I have a pretty good batting average. And
so the secret to success in real estate is don't swing for the fences.
Don't swing. Maybe that could
just
be
get
it.
on
that
base.
Could be it.
Yeah.
Just get on base and be happy with a very good deal. Because I made mistakes. I've made mistakes. I made in 2005. There was a realtor friend of mine who somehow, Charlottesville, Virginia is about an hour and a half where I live, but and he was a realtor here, but he got the rights to market this campus housing outside of University of Virginia, and there's all condos, and it was all going to be sold to investors. And it's 2005, and at that point I was thinking about, I might want to try to get involved in campus housing. For reasons I thought campus housing might be a good idea. This guy came along with this program, and I bought, and I learned that that was not a great idea. The market tanked. Nobody knew that. 2008 and all that. That's fine, but that's that's out of our control. But I should not have bought into a condo. I thought, in retrospect, where everybody was an investor, because your exit strategy was limited. If you wanted to get out, you could only normal people, normal residents wouldn't be buying in there, and the loan options for anybody buying in there was very limited because it was all investors. And the board maintained it very well, but I saw down the road a risk that if you have a building full of investors, and this was a brand new build, down the road, are they going to be willing to do the repairs needed to maintain the building? Because it's an investment. I mean, I'm not living there. What do I really care? So, a lot of people in this project ended up being foreclosed upon because of the downturn, or they did short sales. I did not. I kept it, and eventually, when it got back above water, I sold it. But so you make mistakes, but you learn from them. And if you have enough singles, and you're not just trying to hit one home run, but you have enough singles, the other properties will help fill in the gaps when you make that one mistake that you're definitely going to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. You kind of fail your way forward much of the time. That's not to say go out and make mistakes all the time, but like you said, if you're hitting solid base hits, a strikeout every once in a while is not gonna kill you. So.
Right.
Joe, this was awesome. It's great having you on. It's great to reconnect with you. I love what you're doing at outoftownlandlord.com. You can connect with Joe at joefacenda.com. Thanks for being on today, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you for having me. It was been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Morgan Media Real Estate Podcast. As you can imagine, producing this great educational content takes a lot of effort and commitment on our part. We only ask one thing in return. Please subscribe to our podcast using your favorite podcast app or by visiting copelandmorgan.com/podcast. And remember, there's no greater compliment than referring us to a friend or colleague. Until next time, I'm Jeff Copeland.